Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, as we learn from St. Augustine, Doctor of the Church, while we read his book, Confessions. Welcome, Catholic pilgrims. I get a lot of messages from people that have finished other seasons, and they thank me for helping them to get through whatever book it is that they just finished. Most often, they tell me that they had tried to read the book before, but they had just sat down with it and tried to devour it and got frustrated and then just gave up. I completely understand this. It's how I felt when I first picked up St. Faustina's diary. I just tried to hurry through it and nothing was sticking. I found that reading these saint books is like appreciating a fine glass of wine. You can't chug it. You need to sip and sit with it, enjoy conversation, think, ponder, and relish the complexity. As we get into this book even more, the readings are going to get heavier, denser, more deep. But we can't let that scare us away. Just trust the process of a little at a time with a short reflection and then time to think. So let's get started today reading from Book 3, Chapter 8 on page 64. Surely it is never wrong at any time or in any place for a man to love God with his whole heart and his whole soul and his whole mind, and to love his neighbor as himself. Sins against nature, therefore, like the sin of Sodom, are abominable and deserve punishment wherever and whenever they are committed. If all nations committed them, all alike would be held guilty of the same charge in God's law. For our Maker did not prescribe that we should use each other in this way. In fact, the relationship which we ought to have with God is itself violated when our nature, of which He is the author, is desecrated by perverted lust. On the other hand, offenses against human codes of conduct vary according to differences of custom, so that no one, whether he is a native or a foreigner, may, to suit his own pleasure, violate the conventions established by the customary usage or the law of the community or the state. For any part that is out of keeping with the whole is at fault. But if God commands a nation to do something contrary to its customs or constitutions, it must be done even if it has never been done in that country before. If it is a practice which has been discontinued, it must be resumed. And if it was not a law before, it must be enacted. In his own kingdom, a king has the right to make orders which neither he nor any other has ever made before. Obedience to his orders is not against the common interest of the community. In fact, if they are disobeyed, the common interest would suffer, because it is the general agreement in human communities that the ruler is obeyed. How much more right, then, has God to give commands, since He is the ruler of all creation, and all His creatures must obey His commandments without demur? For all must yield to God, just as, in the government of human society, the lesser authority must yield to the greater. With sins of violence, the case is the same as with sins against nature. Here, the impulse is to injure others, either by word or by deed, but by whichever means it is done, there are various reasons for doing it. A man may injure his enemy for the sake of revenge. A robber may assault a traveler to secure for himself something that is not his own. Or a man may attack someone whom he fears in order to avoid danger to himself. Or the injury may be done from envy, which will cause an unhappy man to harm another more fortunate than himself, or a rich man to harm someone whose rivalry he fears for the future or already resents. Again, it may be done for the sheer joy of seeing others suffer, as is the case with those who watch gladiators or make fun of other people and jeer at them. These are the main categories of sin. They are hatched from the lust for power, from gratification of the eye, and from gratification of corrupt nature, from one or two of these, or from all three together. Because of them, O God most high, most sweet, Our lives offend against your 10-stringed harp, your commandments, the 3 which proclaim our duty to you, and the 7 which proclaim our duty to men. But how can sins of vice be against you, since you cannot be marred by perversion? How can sins of violence be against you, since nothing can injure you? Your punishments are for the sins which men commit against themselves. Because although they sin against you, they do wrong to their own souls, and their malice is self-betrayed. They corrupt and pervert their own nature, which you made, and for which you shaped the rules, either by making wrong use of the things which you allow, or by becoming inflamed with passion to make unnatural use of things which you do not allow. Or else their guilt consists in raving against you in their hearts and with their tongues, and kicking against the goad, or in playing havoc with the restrictions of human society, and brazenly exulting in private feuds and factions, each according to his fancies or his fads. This is what happens, O Fountain of Life, when we abandon you, who are the one true creator of all that ever was or is, and each of us proudly sets his heart on some one part of your creation instead of on the whole. So it is by the path of meekness and devotion that we must return to you. You rid us of our evil habits and forgive our sins when we confess to you. You listen to the groans of the prisoners and free us from the chains which we have forged for ourselves. This you do for us unless we toss our heads against you in the illusion of liberty and in our greed for gain, at the risk of losing all. Love our own good better than you yourself, who are the common good of all. Like I said in the beginning, don't get overwhelmed by all that St. Augustine is talking about here. If you don't catch everything he is saying, that's okay. The goal isn't to completely and fully understand everything all at once. The goal is to let it marinate in our minds and stretch our minds a bit. So the part I want to focus on today is maybe the more complex part, and I want to break it down a little at a time. We are going to focus on the second paragraph. Now, St. Augustine is speaking about God's commandments, human laws, what happens when we break God's commandments, and what happens when we break human laws. So let's just start with the first line. He says, quote, "On the other hand, offenses against human codes of conduct vary according to differences of custom, so that no one, whether he is a native or a foreigner, may, to suit his own pleasure, violate the conventions established by the customary usage or the law of the community or the state." Okay, that's a really long sentence, but let's break it down. Each culture has their own customs. Americans, we like to form lines. Other cultures do not. When we lived in Turkey, we had to learn that when you go buy something that's relatively important, you don't just go in and buy something. The custom in Turkey is to go, sit, have tea, talk about your family, and then after some time has passed, you get down to doing business. This is how we bought our leather coats. This is how we bought our Turkish rugs. You have to establish a relationship first. Whereas in America, you just kind of go in, you find what you like, and you buy it. In Turkey, I also had to learn to haggle. It felt offensive to me, but it isn't to the Turkish people. And it would be wrong for me to force them to do things as we do in America. These particular customs are not inherently wrong or inherently good. They are just different. And people take offense when you don't follow the customs of a country, because we say to ourselves, hey, these are their customs. These are the rules that they've laid down. When you go in, you need to follow them. Okay, then moving on, it says, quote, "But if God commands a nation to do something contrary to its customs or constitutions, it must be done, even if it has never been done in that country before. If it is a practice which has been discontinued, it must be resumed, and if it was not a law before, it must be enacted, unquote. So if God has commanded something, a country is required to follow it. Just as when we go into a country, we're like, hey, you got to follow their rules. We even more so have to follow God's commandments and rules. Now, I know that we like to think that we can just do whatever we want, but if God has commanded it, and even if it goes against the way you want to do things, it still needs to be obeyed. Or down the line, there's going to be punishments. For example, God has commanded that marriage is between one man and one woman. Marriage is not ours to play with, no matter how much some people want it to be different. Going on, it then says, quote, in his own kingdom, a king has the right to make orders which neither he nor any other has ever made before, unquote. Christ is king, and he is God, and that means that he makes the rules when it comes to morality, not us. We are his created beings, and we don't get to tell God how things go. He tells us. Going on, it says, quote, obedience to his orders is not against the common interest of the community. In fact, if they were disobeyed, the common interest would suffer, because it is in the general agreement in human communities that the ruler is obeyed, unquote. If we follow what God commands, it will never be against the common interest of the community. Now, some people won't like it, but the common interest of the community, it will be for their greater good. But we will suffer if we go against it. God and his church have forbidden the killing of innocent people. Abortion is the killing of innocent people. We have disobeyed God's command, and we see that our culture is suffering. We have tens of millions of babies dead. We have families that have been broken apart. We have childless families on purpose. We have lots of women who are struggling internally with what they have done. This is not healthy. This is not for the common interest. And so, what does this mean for us? Well, it is hard to control everybody else and say, hey, let's all follow the commands of Christ and his church, the Catholic Church. For a lot of people, that will go over like a lead balloon. What we must do first and foremost is make sure that we individually are following the commands of Christ and his church. You are not the final authority on matters of the faith. I'm not the final authority on matters on the faith. If there is anything that the church teaches that you struggle with, you are going to have to learn to submit in humility. Running away and trying to ignore what God has commanded will not hide you or free you from obedience to God. Now, some may not like to hear that, but it's just true. Now, I know I'm running a bit long. This is really important, and there's a lot here that we need to really internalize. So maybe go over it again and really take it bit by bit and let these words sit with you. But we will pause here for today. But until next time, live the faith boldly and travel well.